Good afternoon, everybody. Today's special guests are Jim Hollingsworth and Greg Covington. So good afternoon, guys. Thanks for joining me, Jim, while we have this open chat with Greg. As people may recognize Jim from other interviews and open chats we've had, you can look back and hear about his history and his father's history of being a SOG soldier. And Greg, this is the first time that we've actually talked to you. Now, Greg, you are what I would say is like, a master knife maker. So that I think all three of us, have that interest of the, historical, stuff. Could you tell us a little bit of what made you get into it?
Sure. Yeah. So as a kid, I always had knives. I had World War II style knives, whatever I could find. And I can even remember taking pieces of wood and carving knives. About the time I was an adult, 18, if that's an adult, I had spent a lot of time shooting in the shooting sports, 1911 45s, and I got into building them and modifying them, and I wanted to make my own grips, and I was looking for a small source supplier of exotic wood. And of course, the internet wasn't like it is now. And searching through this is maybe around 1988, I want to say 89. I found out there was a place in Columbus, Ohio, about an hour from me, called Koval Knives, and they were a supplier of knife making supplies. And I went into their warehouse and shop just to buy some exotic wood, and I felt like it was when they opened the doors into Willy Wonka's factory. I saw all this knife making equipment. I saw, some custom knives that were there, and it was just kind of like a moment. And I thought, okay, I can do this. I'm going to jump into this whole hog, and which I did. I bought some basic piece of equipment, and I proceeded to ruin a lot of steel for about a year. And again, I think at the time maybe there was one or two books on knife making. It was no YouTube or any reference, nor was there anybody close to actually give you information. So you just kind of had to learn on your own. And that's basically where I started with it. I just kind of jumped into it, working a full-time job at the same time in healthcare. And once I got underway and felt like, hey, I can make a few knives, I got interested heavily in the SOG knife. Oddly enough, and how I had even become aware of that was the movie Uncommon Valor. There's a character, Fred Ward's character Wilkes, had a knife that I didn't know what it was. I saw it in the movie, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. And that started me on the, I got to find out what this knife is. And I think around that time, there was a catalog called Lancer Militaria that sold a reproduction of a SOG knife. And this was prior to SOG Specialties. And I set about finding one of those. When I did, I realized it was kind of a cheap piece of junk. And I tried to start reproducing it. And in my whole path of it, I would say since maybe 1990, I've worked on trying to reproduce a SOG knife. And then, I moved off into a lot of other things. I've made Bowie knives and a lot of other knives. But lately, I've been focusing quite a bit on Vietnam era combat knives. This has always been my passion.
Speaking of passions and exciting knife experiences, Jim, you had a knife experience at SOAR where a gentleman wanted to show you different aspects. So could you entertain the group here and tell us about that?
Yeah, Jay Graves. Always at SOAR, they have the Save the Montagnard people, and they raise money for different aspects of charity for these folks and stuff like that. And on the table there was a stiletto knife, and I was eyeballing it and looking at it and picking it up and looking, and I'm like, man, that's really cool. And Jay Graves came up, put his arm around me, and was like, twirling it in his hands, and he's like, you know how to kill somebody with one of these? And I'm like, no, I don't, and he's like, you stab him here, or you do this, and he's like, you hit him here and they can't scream. It's just like blowing my mind. it was, you know, I was joking with Jason about this in the past, and I was like, you know, you sit there and you kind of like, I don't know what to do. And because there was so much sincerity in his voice, and it was just fantastic. But yeah, I think it was might have been like a World War II style, you know, just German type stiletto knife. It was good size, but that gentleman was very skilled with knife handling. But yeah, that's pretty much what it was.
So, Greg, so you went to SOAR this year, did you?
Yes. So I had for my first introduction to SOG, I think when I read the book The Dying Place way back, and that's really what had interested me. And through all the years of reproducing these type of knives, Greg Walker of Fighting, he used to be the editor of Fighting Magazine. He's been an author, written quite a bit. He suggested that maybe I should attend SOAR because at that point the SOG knives that I've been making had gotten pretty close, and I got to where I could reproduce them pretty steadily. And Greg facilitated that, and I went in October, and that was an incredible experience. I'm planning on going back next year for sure.
And what did the veteran say about your knives? Because I mean, Jim and I both know that your knives are of, like, you know, the highest quality, and now you're starting to you know, engrave them too, you know, personalize them. And you know, I'd be scared to be making that knife and then, oh, I'm just going to try this new etcher out. That would scare me.
Well, it's nothing venture, nothing gained, is it always with knife making. Sometimes you have to like just say, you know, screw it, I'm going to go for it and try something else. And if it ruins it, it ruins it. But you know, as you get more experience, that you get past that. With the guys that I met out at SOAR, I had maybe about 15 different knives available, and I didn't bring any home. And the reception that I got from people was just remarkable. You know, you could see guys picking these things up and sharing their memories about them. All their input, you know, both good and bad regarding the original knife itself is fascinating to me. You know, and I can't say enough about the type of people that were there. They were just absolutely fantastic. They shared knowledge, time, and a lot of them purchased knives as well. So that was nice.
Probably some of the best R&D you can get is picking the brains of these folks. Like, you know, we were joking earlier, it's like, you know, they took them into the field, they broke them, they threw them away. They had, you know, folks there craft them certain things to, you know, fill gaps, and, you know, that feedback is going to be invaluable.
Absolutely. It was pretty awesome to get that kind of information from those individuals. I had a number of discussions regarding what they considered would be better, what knives they thought were better than SOG knives, what mostly were carried, and those, knowing all those little things kind of helps you incorporate into, you know, what actually the real guys would use versus, you know, what movie knives and everything else. You know, that all that stuff's cool. You know, I like it, but when it comes down to the brass tacks, what did they really like?
Right. So on that note, I know I feel like a little schoolboy here doing show and tell. So I'm gonna well, okay, I'll tell you the whole story of these, and then I'll go back to the knife that we should be talking about here. So I'm up here in Canada, and as people might know or might not know, there were quite a few Canadians that were in the US military during the Vietnam War. And there was a Marine Corps Canadian veteran up here, Vietnam vet, and he wanted to sell his knives. So this is one of them, and this is the Conetta. I think you would know probably how to, you know, so it's kind of the K-bar family style, right? So yes, that was one of the neat knives. And then he said, oh, would you be interested in these two knives? So this is as you can see, a pretty, rudimentary knife. And this interesting knife. So, and I said, sure. And he said, well, how about this knife? So this is my favorite. This is the U.S. Air Force knife, which many of them, the SOG guys liked because it's just a practical knife, right? And this one, if people are not aware, on the nut here, it will tell you the date. So this is a Vietnam era one. It's 1967. So that's a nice one, and it's almost mint. But the story behind these two interesting knives is that, and he wasn't SOG, but it's just part of my collection, that there were some VC sappers that wanted to come underneath the wire, and they didn't make it underneath the wire. And this guy said, with a very steely look in his eye, yeah, these guys didn't need these knives anymore, so I took those, and the other guys took the AKs, right? So it's kind of eerie in a way to have knives that I know that have that kind of history, but it's kind of cool also, right? Luckily my kids know that my kids are adults, so like 25 and 31 now, so they pretty know that they know the stuff that I have. And now you were going to bring or show us some of your knives that you have, Greg.
Oh, sure.
You have some original, and then you have ones that you've made, right?
Yes. So, okay, we'll start with this would be an original. Can you see this? Okay.
Yep.
This is what would be considered a serial numbered plumb bladed SOG knife. Serial number, can't see it right now. But these were one of the most common of the SOG knives. Brass guard, plum colored blade, oddly enough. Some of them during the heat treatment process picked up that color. It's common to see those. So this is a very common SOG knife. It's one of the ones that I will commonly reproduce just because of the familiarity. So this would be one of the originals. The other original, and I have two different variants of this, is the iron guarded 6-inch blade sterile knife, no markings whatsoever. And these are the ones that you really have to be careful with when we're talking about fakes. This is what the Museum Replicas Limited knife copied this one. And when you look at these, the construction was, it was pretty cheap. It was kind of rough, etc. But in a lot of ways, I've always liked this blade pattern the best of the SOG knives. So these two were originals. And then when we get to, like say, for instance, a reproduction that I would make would be this. And I've deliberately weathered this. This is my own personal one. And it's to mimic the brass guard model, serial numbered. I actually do the electrochemical etching and try to capture that font. And when guys order them from me, I can put whatever number that they like on that. But the one thing I do now is I do stamp the blades, and you really can't see it on this one, but on the Narcaso, I have a stamp made up, and I needed to keep it in line with the SOG theme because I didn't want some oddball logo on there that ruins it for me. And so I had a SOG bomb burst with a little bit of different lettering underneath it, and they're on there enough that people can't get them out, so the knives can't be fake. So this would be a very common model that I do. But
no, sorry to interrupt you. That's very unique blade that when you go to here's like the traditional K-bar. This was a different one, Marine Corps. Well, actually, this is not a K-bar. It's a Camillus, but Marine Corps. Now, this kind of knife, you have to have a certain depth to be able to, utilize it in combat. But this has your standard style blade. But that blade that you have for the SOG knife is a very different style. Do you know any history of why it is shaped in that way?
Yeah, to a degree. I guess Ben Baker would have been the guy who really had the specifics. But part of the reason, from what I understand, is during the testing when Ben Baker was prototyping these knives, the very first models were what they call now 7-inch recons. And this little choil area, the area before the guard before it gets to the actual cutting edge, was very minimal on those. And during some of the testing, Ben Baker was, from what I understand, was stabbing the knives into pig carcasses to test their penetration. And many times you'll hear this in combat stories, guys utilizing a knife and they can't pull it back out. So when they designed the knife, he wanted an extended choil. The 7-inch recon didn't have, so you could get your fingers around the guard and such without cutting your fingers and pull it out. But then again, there was also the upper little, it was not really a choil, but this little dip in the blade here might have been, along the lines of thinking that when Randall designed knives, and he would teach knife fighting where the knife would be held edge up and the finger could be put forward of the guard for these up type strokes. So, and that little dip facilitated that. But on the SOG knives, unlike the K-bars or any of the Camillus or the Canetta or whatever, those typically had a sharpened clip. The SOG knives did not. It was down. I can imagine it could be sharpened. I've never seen one sharpened, but I think the idea was more just a practical field knife. And guys that I've talked to, they overall liked them. There were a lot of different minor complaints, but I think guys would have preferred maybe a little bit longer blade in a lot of ways.
And with that, now you can educate us here, because I'd heard that knife was kind of hard to keep sharp. That's what I had read somewhere. I don't know if that's true or not, but unlike the K-bar, which would keep that razor sharp edge, that one I'd heard that it was not as easy to keep it sharp. Had you heard that before?
Yes, I have. I've heard a lot of bad things about the original SOG knives. Now, keep in mind that like the K-bar and also the Air Force survival knife, typically those are made out of 1095 high carbon steel. And it's a really good grade of steel for knives. I use it off and on for quite a few things. But and it's 1095 has this capability of becoming a really hard steel. And what they did with the SOG knives, from what I understand, that they were made from a Japanese grade steel called SK3. And SK3 is the equivalent, more or less, of W1 steel, which again is pretty close to 1095. For a lot of practical purposes, are mostly the same steel. So the question is, why didn't they hold an edge as well? It has to come down to the heat treatment. And then it also comes to edge geometry. A K-bar typically is, I think it's 5/32 of an inch thick. It's a relatively thin blade. The SOG knives start off at about a 1/4 inch stock. They're pretty thick. They're a lot thicker than what most people would think. And across that distance, where that edge has to come down into a V, it's pretty steep. And on a factory basis, when you got guys that really don't necessarily care about what they're making, they're just putting them together, you have a really steep platform on which to put an edge. So what it comes down to is heat treatment. Was it good or bad? And there's a lot of indications that it was bad. And then the geometry of the edge itself. In fact, they say that they think that the plum coloring a lot of the blades was because some of the knives had come back with poor heat treatment and were disassembled, either tempered again or reheat treated again. I'm guessing tempered again, and they changed colors. So there was some quality control issues there as well.
Now, were those knives made in like an assembly line fashion, or were they handcrafted? Like you were describing blade geometry and stuff. Is that machine blade geometry, or is it like somebody sitting there eyeballing on a, some sort of machine?
I would say somewhere both.
In between.
And the reason why I say that is that I think that the Japanese factories kept getting better and better and better as it went along, and to where it got into the 80s, companies like Almar having their knives produced there, which were some really fine work. And that was one of the challenges in trying to recreate a SOG knife, was trying to do maybe what a machine had done a machine that you don't have. And and so some of the little characteristics with the grind, I think all of it had to be done by hand, but it depended on the equipment they were using to get there. And I found that hard to reproduce. But also, again, if you got a guy that's, the night before's had a little too much sake, and then goes in the next day, you never really know what you're going to get.
Yeah, right.
So for like me being a tradesman, I often make things in my garage, and so I would be capable of creating the shape of a knife, but where I would really screw up is actually the heat treatment and the quenching. So for those people who don't know about knife making, can you just give us kind of the layman's terms about quenching or heat treatment and what that does to the steel itself?
Sure. So typically if you buy a straight up virgin bar of steel that would be capable of producing a good knife, let's just say, for instance, a piece of leaf spring 5160 steel, and you can buy it in annealed form, which means that it's in the softest state that it can possibly be. And let's say that you would take that knife, grind it to a shape that you'd like, and at that point, it's going to be ready to be heat treated. It's too soft to be used as a knife. What you would do from that point, and I'll skip a lot of steps because you can get real technical. It depends on if you forged the blade or whatever. But most carbon steels, I'm excluding stainlesses, and so I'll give this as a broad term. I know all my knife maker friends would, they would spit out their beer over this and stuff. But in general, carbon steels, 5160, 1095, 80 CRV2, this W1 SK3 type steel, all these type of steels would have to be brought either in which I use a temperature controlled oven, to 1500 degrees, and they will soak at that temperature for about 10 to 15 minutes, and taken out of the oven, quickly quenched in an appropriate oil. I mean, actually, you can get away with using canola oil. As you get more technical and you get further along with things, you end up using the proper type of oils. And I have two different types of oils for the several different types of steel that I use. So when that blade hits that quench, its grain structure is changing within the steel, and it becomes a more hard form of that's just too technical to actually get into, but it hardens the steel at that point. And as that blade starts coming down to room temperature after that quench, it's going to come to a point that it's hardened to a point that's too hard to use as a knife for most steels. It's going to be brittle and fragile, but you do want it to get it to that point where it's as hard as possible, because your next step is called tempering. So from that 1500 degree, or I would say a dull red heat, if you're heat treating in a forge, dull red to oranges into the quench. After that's cooled off the touch and you've wiped the oil off, you would temper it. And the tempering cycles are typically around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And what I do is my blades will go into a temperature controlled oven at 400 degrees for 2 hours. Then they'll be removed, let to cool back to room temperature, and then they'll repeat the process of another 400 degree temper. And that causes all the remaining hard particles of the steel to become in a softer state, which makes it to have both toughness and edge holding ability. And that's the key when it comes to knives. Ideally, you'd want it as hard as possible to hold the edge as long as possible. But the problem is that it's too brittle to be used as a knife. So you have to have that fine line between flexibility and hardness to make a knife. And they usually judge that by a scale called a Rockwell scale. And that judges hardness on a blade. And most knives you'll see fall around 57 to 60 Rockwell. And that is usually that best combination between toughness and edge holding.
So if there's a screw up in there somewhere, is that when you get blades that nick or nick really easily, or do all blades nick in general?
It really depends. I think any knife you can destroy or you can nick, and a lot of it comes down to geometry. Even with the best heat treatment, a super fine razor thin edge, it's just not physically possible for it to survive hitting an object that's harder than it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, you can screw up a lot of stuff in heat treat, and one of the advantages is if you find a maker that's been doing it for quite a while and handles the heat treat, they're typically heat treating 1 or 2 blades at a time, and it's very specific. In a factory, you have to appreciate a bunch of them are going through an oven at once, and then they're all going into some form of quenching at once. And it kind of falls into this mass production. In general it works well, but a lot of times it doesn't.
Right.
Wow. That's yeah, I don't think that I'll be trying that out in my garage. I'll leave that to you. Now, also, I had seen that, I mean, before, I guess if you just wanted to hang it on the wall, and you weren't going to be out there trying to chop stuff down, that I saw that you've been using saw blades, which is the old industrial, big diameter saw blades, and you've just recently in the last couple of weeks you've been making like a banana style. Is that the correct terminology?
Yes, bolo, the
Okay.
bananas bolo style knife.
Yeah, and you made just for an experiment that you made those out of the saw blade, correct?
Yes, yes. So sawmill steel, like the big circular saw blades that were in the older sawmills. I think typically now you'll find the sawmill blades that have tips on them. They're carbide tips. So the steel that's typically in the blades isn't good enough to make. It doesn't have enough carbon to make a decent knife. The older ones do, and I have some old sawmill blades that I've collected over the years. And the general thinking through the knife community was all saw blade steel was L6 grade steel, which is oddly enough is what the Vietnam era Gerber Mark IIs were made from. L6 steel, which is one of my favorite steels. It has a higher nickel content. It's an alloy steel, so it's actually very tough, very springy, and pretty hard to destroy. So a lot of times I would find these things, and I've gotten away from salvaging steel quite a bit. But my newest project that I'm working on, I'm going to be making available here pretty soon, is reproductions of the CISO round tip bolo knife that was issued to SOG. And I was in the process of prototyping one. I got a little impatient waiting for some steel to come in the appropriate size. And I thought, well, I've got this old sawmill blade, so I'll cut it out of that. And this is actually that knife. So I have an original one of these. And when I lay them down next to each other, I'm having a hard time with myself telling them apart. Same thickness, same type of handle, pretty much the same bolt arrangement. But yeah, these actually, you'll see these used quite a bit. I think there's a picture of Mad Dog Schreiber floating around out there where you'll see it tucked down into the back of his gear. But sawmill steel, there's always a challenge when you're using mystery steel. But this blade, after it quenched and hardened, it hardened right up. It's fine. So I'm guessing that this, more than likely, being as old as it is L6 or something very close. But interestingly enough, the majority of the SOG knives I make are a grade of steel called 8670, which is also a saw grade steel. I like it for its toughness, and there's several other little properties in there that I could probably talk all day about, but it just works well for me. So I prefer that toughness over a super high carbon blade that might hold an edge just slightly longer, but also it would be more prone to chipping or breakage.
Now, just for the novice out there, the Gerber, if you can grab the Gerber again and show the serial number on there, and so just for the listener, that you can go online and research that serial number, and it will tell you what date it is. Now, if it's from 1974 and onwards, it's not going to be worth as much as a Vietnam era. So just be cautious. Now, I can't see from here, but does that have the like the saw blade edge on it? Like,
no. The saw blade came in, I believe, in 1971, maybe 72.
yeah.
This would be a 1969 production.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, this one's serial number 12,500, which is it's got a little story into itself. I thought it was pretty cool. A friend of mine who unfortunately passed away back in 06 was Army Security Agency in Vietnam and spent his entire life beyond that in some capacity working for the government. And amongst quite a few other knives, he was kind of a knife and gun guy before he went to Vietnam. So he had some really bizarre stuff over the years. And I gained a lot of knowledge from that guy. And the Gerber that he bought and carried in Vietnam was serial number 13,000 exactly. And I just thought it was odd that this was just 500 off from that, but both were made in 1969.
Now, with the SOG plum knife, with that serial number, is there a way to trace when those were made?
Yeah, I believe in Jason Hardy's book, which is just the best book on SOG knives. There's been several that have been done, but the pictures are worth 1,000 words in there. And he's got such a great history in there that it will describe those serial number ranges roughly and what years they were. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. I want to say 1968, 1969, something like that. But they were done in these batches. And I know a good number of them were lost. There's a whole range of serial numbers that were probably stolen, lost. And I guess there was some sort of big investigation of them trying to figure out who stole all these knives. But yes.
Wasn't me. I wasn't born yet.
Or maybe I wish I could find that box.
It's probably traded for some, alcoholic beverages for the club.
True.
So if viewers want to, I mean, Jason's books are the pivotal, research books. If somebody doesn't quite have that budget, you can pick up this. And I don't know this guy at all, but this is the SOG knife book. It's just like a good entry level, and you have all sorts of pictures in here of all different knives. I think that's probably $35. So, just definitely worth getting one just to see the different styles. Now, I know off air, here I'm seeing that there's different terminologies, the fat guard, and different, I like, did you ever try and make one of these ones yet?
Yes. I've made maybe close to a dozen over the years.
Wow. Could you, I know we were talking about this off air, but can you tell the viewers what to watch out for as far as fakes and, what you would say would be, museum quality fakes? I know because now they have some age to them, and for the novice and even for the more experienced collector, very easy to get stung.
Oh, absolutely. So, of course, the first mass-produced reproduction of any SOG type knife was SOG Specialties with their S1 knife that I can't remember the first year that came out, but they still produce that knife today. And it's a copy of what was considered the 5th Special Forces Group Mess Association knife. They weren't really carried on, say, SOG missions. They were typically given at the end of tour. And that was, it was a very well-made knife, but they stamped them deep enough that I can't say that I've ever seen one of those attempted to be passed off as a fake. There were just enough changes. I think most people knew what they were. Where you starting into dangerous territory was in the mid to late 80s. There was a company that was a division of Atlanta Cutlery called Museum Replicas Limited. And typically they sold knives that were, medieval reenactor sword type stuff. But for a short period of time, and the very first time I was aware of ever seeing, there was a catalog that used to sell military books called Lancer Militaria. and Lancer had an ad for a Special Forces knife, and that's what it was. It was one of these museum replicas limited copies, and it's a copy of the this Iron Guard Recon. Now this is a real one, and they did a very, very, very close job. Now I do have one of these MRL knives, Museum Replicas knives, and you can actually see really how close it is. Now, MRL, when they released these, they would be stamped MRL on the blade very lightly, and I believe it would say Conyers, Georgia below it. And then on the pommel, it was stamped India because that's where they were produced. They did such a close job, even in the not so great construction as the originals, that would fool a lot of people. And so very commonly what you'll do is you'll see people remove the markings and on both sides, and they'll just touch it up with gun bluing. And in this case, this is one that I found at one point in time that had been done. I mean, there's no markings on this whatsoever. Now, I have, like I say, these are the most dangerous ones. These are the ones, I believe there's even one on eBay right now where people will change little things with the handle and they'll pass these off original. The number one thing that I go to on the MRL blade is where the plunge cut starts into the knife. And the best thing I can tell anybody is to research. Pick up Jason Hardy's book, or the book you have, I believe, is Mike Silvey, who's also a very, very great knife maker and a real scholar when it comes to military knives in general. Study every picture you can of known originals, and then go back and look up an MRL knife on the internet, and you'll see that this plunge cut here is much different than the original. It has this tendency to roll and swoop back, while the originals are most straight up and down. Also, the little cutout here on the top is a little more sharp than the originals. But if you look past that and don't see that, the construction overall quality is so close that it will fool a lot of people. And these have been sold many, many times to people for thousands of dollars.
And I'm going to ask you one question, and I think Jim, did you have anything to ask, or?
No, not right this second.
Okay, all right. I didn't want to take over the whole chat here. So Greg, so you would know better than myself. What is, if someone should find one of those copies that you have and someone has left it the way they found it with the stamp of India and on the, so it's not being passed off as an original, what is that worth?
They have a collector's value in their own right. The MRL knives, they only stayed around for a short period of time. And I really don't know all the backstory on how many were produced, etc. Not many, and they hung around for a short period of time. So they even have, because they're so close, they have that kind of collector's value. So I would say one that's still marked might be $400, $500, $600. It wouldn't be unrealistic. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this is an important thing. I mean, and that's why I asked, because I have quite a large collection from World War I, World War II, and before I got into the Vietnam history, it was German stuff that was always faked. And of course, fakers get better, and really fake German stuff is not worth anything. But that's why I wanted to ask you about that, because someone might be looking through their box of stuff going, oh my God, I have this. And they might, if I didn't ask you that, they would go, oh, it's only worth like $50. So on the flip side, if somebody does their research and they find an original SOG knife, what do you feel? I mean, I know we're into that gray area, condition, and is there history and all that, but what would be a rough idea of what an original, say, plumb knife or something like that is worth in today's market?
Well, again, like you said, condition is everything. But even in the worst condition, I've never seen one go under $1,000. So, it would have to be in some really, really poor condition for it to fall under $1,000. I would say in average to good condition, you might be talking 2,000 to 3,000. I've seen the prices fluctuate up and down with the market, and I've never quite understood why they did that, because they are a historical item. But that's typically where they fall. I mean, if you had $3,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you still kind of be pressed to find what you wanted.
Wow. And I'll be careful how I word this, so if you don't want to answer it to the full extent, but you were, as we all do as collectors and whatever, we always look on different internet sites. And I know that I've sent you a few links to some of these internet sites, and you had said that you had seen one knife and you knew the history of that knife, and you knew that it was being sold, and unfortunately that the price was reaching very high figure. But again, that you realized that the person that made that, you had the history behind it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so, again, I think that the issue with a lot of that is, what I would advise people is just don't impulse buy when it comes to something like that. Go and do the research. If anything looks even slightly off, it probably is.
Right.
But like you had mentioned with German collectibles, some of those reproductions are so old,
yeah,
that they've picked up that natural patina themselves. They've been doing that stuff since what, the 50s, I believe, 50s or early 60s.
Yeah.
So that's kind of getting to where it is with knives. So you have to really just research, pick up the books, and ask people. Try to find people that know. I mean, if anybody wants to ask me what I think of any particular knife, I won't claim to be an expert, but what I will claim is I've seen enough of them, and you just get a feel, and you pick up a body of knowledge. You can say, okay, immediately something's not quite right, and that's the best way to proceed.
And we will be adding your when we upload this, I will be adding your email address, and so that's a good thing. So if there is an avid collector, and if they wish to get in touch with you, the email that you gave me, I can pass that on to them and also add that to the
Sure.
link. But
Sure.
I guess I should also say that you do have a daytime job, and your time is limited to how many knives you can pump out, right?
Right. It's actually a nighttime job. So I've ever since I started making knives, I've been on a night shift in the emergency room. So it's trying to find that delicate balance between work, sleep, and play, which I consider my knives. I still love it every time I get out in the shop and make them. That's why I've done it for so long. It gets tricky. You have to juggle the time and what you can devote your time to at any given moment.
And you still build all your stuff out of your home, or do you have a proper shop someplace?
I build everything out of my home. I mean, my shop has been many iterations over the years, and in this case, I have a small little building out back, and I occupy half of the garage and half of the basement, and sometimes the kitchen.
That's
And
awesome.
My wife wouldn't put up with me if it didn't make money.
So normally we try and keep to an hour. I find that that's a good time frame. But for this last little 10 minutes, what would you advise for the younger collector if they want to get into collecting knives? Let's just keep it to the World War II era. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my knives here. The Vietnam era. What would be a good starter knife for a young collector, in your opinion?
Most definitely, and the most affordable would be the Air Force survival knife. If you can find one that's, again, like you noted on the pommel, they're dated. And if you find them within the Vietnam era, that's a good starter. Those were carried quite a bit. And in fact, I had a couple SOG veterans tell me that, and I have one right here, tell me that one of the reasons why they preferred this knife was because it was short enough that it didn't, they could put it on their web gear as such, and it didn't, it was short enough that it didn't interfere with the rest of their gear. So they like these quite a bit. And where you'll see a lot of guys wearing K-bars, They liked them for other reasons. Yeah, that being said, this would be probably your best bet, and then move on to collecting things like a K bar and eBay and all these other sorts. There's so many of those made that there's no shortage of those. And they fluctuate with the market as far as pricing as well. But you can expect a decent, like World War II era, which would have been used in Vietnam as well, in the under $200 range.
Yeah, I picked up like 3 of these. This is the Marine Corps version, the Camillus one, but they had an auction up here, and these are World War II, and I just gave them a light dusting. I sold one, but I still have 2 more here. Not that Jim and I seem to have 2 things, or especially the one thing that Jim and I both collect is watches. So he's always sending me pictures of the newest watches, and then as I'm pulling them out of the drawer, I'm going, I really have a problem here. So, and
amen. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah. So
right.
But I think did you have a last question to ask, Jim?
No, you actually kind of covered it. One of the things I was curious about was, whether it's modern steel is better, or if going back and repurposing older steel was kind of the way to go. And you kind of, talked about it with, your bolo knife that you were building and stuff like that. But you always watch the television, the knife TV shows on TV, and, they're like, here, ball bearings and, leaf springs from a truck and, all these things, go make me a knife. And then they beat the snot out of it to try to, see how tough it is and stuff. But so, it was like, man, you make a knife out of anything. I guess you could, but is it really worth it? Type of thing.
Well, true. I mean, that's the Forged in Fire, I believe you're referring to.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of friends on that show. I'd done a slight interview for the possibility of being on the show, but there were quite a number of reasons why I didn't want to do that. But I've done all that. I do a lot of bladesmithing, meaning forging knives myself. I have anvil forges, hydraulic presses, and stuff like that. And while I like doing that, a lot of times there's no real great benefit in trying to salvage stuff than finding the virgin seals to start with.
Right.
Also, when you had mentioned like with all the newer steels, there's so much research being done and advances in these super steels that are out there, and I've used them and they're incredible. But then the cost goes up dramatically just even for the steel itself, and so I kind of don't try to fix what's not broke, and that's the way it is with most knives now.
Yeah, it makes sense. I have a small farm, so I didn't really start using knives and everything else until I have to cut hay bales, the strings off of hay bales and all the plastic wraps and all these other crazy things that you ever think you need a knife for. And I can tell you, I've probably gone through about 20 different types of knives over the last 3.5 years because, that blade doesn't hold an edge. It's garbage. I bent that one. I broke this one. This one doesn't lock anymore. I lost the really good one in the tree line someplace. I can't find it, and you kind of go back and forth. But when you start shopping for, something that you would kind of consider decent, you look at the prices and the cost associated with it. And it's like, wow, good tools are expensive. Right?
Absolutely.
And then I think the average person doesn't realize, somebody like yourself, the time and the effort and the knowledge that goes into building a knife and why they cost what they cost. When you start looking at that aspect of it, it's like, all right, yeah, $300, $500, $800 for a knife or whatever it's probably, not a bad place to be, but it's, sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow, right? Especially when you're like me and it's like, lost another one.
Absolutely. I've always felt that there was like this threshold that somebody would have to cross as far as price, and after they cross that large threshold of cost on a knife, they go, okay, well, that's not that bad, and they move on to the next. And and you're absolutely right. When I look back at maybe just the little things that I've learned over the years. And when I talk to people that want to know more about making knives or stop and visit in the shop, I've done this for so many years, I guess I don't really realize how much knowledge that I've picked up, you just become something that you just routinely practice every day. And you could, like I say, you could go on talking for hours and hours for all the finer details of little things that go on into making a knife. But I've been fortunate, that I've been able to do this and had a lot of fun doing it, and people are still interested. And the whole thing with the SOR and the SOG, that just enveloped pretty much everything I was interested in at once.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, this is why, having the ability to do these open mics or interviews or whatever is so, so good, because whether it be you doing the knives or me trying to get these guys' stories and books, or these online talks, that their history is not getting lost. And that's the whole, for me, that's my guiding factor, right? While we still have these men, they can tell you about the knives, why they liked them, what they didn't like, whatever. You can learn, you can read 1,000 books, but until you meet somebody who was actually there, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things I like to try to capture with the knives. A knife for a lot of guys was a really personal thing. They would either bring them from home or it was private purchase. But because the collector's market has become so rabid in the prices that they pay for such things, for most people to find an original SOG knife, it's price prohibitive. Then much less actually have a knife that they could use, because as soon as you buy one, it becomes a collector's piece. You don't want anything to happen to it. And that's what I've tried to do. I like the idea of making a knife that, when you look at it, say, oh, that's a SOG knife, but it also is made out of what I consider to be a better steel overall construction. You can actually use it and have fun using it and kind of capture a little piece of that history, and then that just moves that along, and every knife has a story to tell. You can show it to people and say, this is the history behind this knife. And then when you start looking at the history behind the SOG knife, you have to talk about SOG, and it's just such an amazing history. And that a lot of it focused down to maybe that one piece of equipment that was very unique to them. And I find that just fascinating.
I think for me, the last thing that I would like to say is that, and I won't say my comment or my thought on this, but I'll tell you what veterans have told me. If you have to use your knife in battle, you're having a really bad day. So when and everybody knows that the stories of Rambo with those huge knives, I mean, that's not the real world. So when, like, we're going back to the Air Force knife, that's a tool, that's a practical tool that you can use. And when weight is everything and you're behind enemy lines, or if you're carrying the stuff, you want something that has multi-purpose. And some of the other knives are simply for combat, the thrusting and cutting, whereas you can do a variety of things with that one, right? So, but anyway, on that note, I think that we'll conclude this one. Thank you very much. Don't go anywhere. We'll have a off the air chat before that we end it, but good to see you again, Jim. Nice to meet you, Greg.
Nice to meet you.
I'll probably have this up and running in the next day or two, and then I'll send you a link.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, guys.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I'm talking to myself at night because I can't forget.